After a long and successful career as a professor of Holocaust and genocide studies, the Israeli historian Omer Bartov, teaching at Brown University in the US, now focuses on his homeland, Israel. In the summer of 2025, he wrote, "I'm a genocide scholar, I know it when I see it." And now he wrote a book which is titled, Israel, What Went Wrong? Mr. Bartov, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
You became quite famous, or as some maybe would say notorious, when a month after the Hamas attack, after the 7th of October, you warned that the crimes of all crimes could be unfolding in Gaza. What was a crucial moment you decided, I have to write a piece and warn basically that this might happen?
So this was in early November 2023. I was initially, like many others, I must say, very worried after the Hamas attack, which was a massacre, was a war crime and a crime against humanity, that Israel would respond to that disproportionately, in part because there were statements by Israeli political and military leaders that indicated what appeared to me potentially a genocidal intent. By the time I wrote that piece in early November, the IDF had already killed over 10,000 people in Gaza, of whom it was assumed, and it turns out rightly, that most of them were civilians. And it was engaged in destruction of large parts of the housing of those people who were being driven from the north to the south. And so I thought that there was good evidence that war crimes were occurring, the crimes against humanity were occurring because of the vast number of civilians already killed by then, and that this could develop into genocide. And I wanted to warn that if Israel were not stopped, it was likely to devolve into genocide.
You also talk about the intent of the political leaders of Israel, and maybe also the military leaders, and that these are or could be proof of genocidal intent. Let's have a look at some of these statements.
It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true.
זכור את אשר עשה לך עמלק, נצטווינו. אנו זוכרים ואנו נלחמים.
אנחנו מטילים מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם ואנחנו נוהגים בהתאם.
Yes. Could you explain why this could be seen as genocidal intent?
Let's start with Yoav Gallant, who was then the Minister of Defense, and a man who had served in the Israeli military, was a general, was a commander of commando units, a highly respected military man with authority, saying about the city of Gaza, well, we will besiege the city, they will have no water, no food, no energy. They are human animals and they will be treated as such. So if you are an Israeli civilian who's being called up to service in Gaza and you're told that they will have nothing, they will have no water, no food, no energy, and you should treat them like human animals, what do you expect that soldiers would do? What would they think about that? So it's clearly incitement. Mm-hmm. So that's incitement to mass killing, right? What Netanyahu says, he's invoking something that most Israeli citizens, the vast majority, know exactly what it is.
What does it mean?
So he's speaking about the people of Amalek. Remember what Amalek did unto you. Now, this is a biblical story. The Israelites in the Bible are crossing the desert from Egypt to the Promised Land, and they're attacked from the rear by people called Amalek. And there's an injunction by God that says the people of Amalek, having attacked you in the back, should be killed. Their cattle, their sheep, their men, their women, their children, and their sucklings. So when you say, remember what Amalek did unto you, and he says, we remember, and we know, we are operating, what does he mean? Everybody understands exactly what the implication is. And then comes the president of the state. The president of Israel has no executive power. but has a great deal of authority as the president.
Yeah.
And he's not even from Netanyahu's party. Herzog is not even from the Likud party. And he says there are no uninvolved people there. It's not that we are fighting. Some people have tried to explain, well, they meant only Hamas. No. He says there are no uninvolved people. It is not a matter of Hamas. Some people say it's all of them. So these are statements that could easily be interpreted as calling for war crimes, for crimes against humanity, as an incitement for genocide. No distinction whatsoever about the entire population. Of course, if you apply that to the Genocide Convention, which calls for intent, it's quite extraordinary because most states engaged in genocide, organizations engaged in genocide, don't say that they're doing it. They say something else. They say we don't have a choice. They say it's a war. They say it's just the enemy. Here, there are very clear statements about that. But the second part is that you have to show that these statements are then being implemented.
Yeah.
And when I was writing in November, we did not know yet.
Yeah, so this was a month after the Hamas attack.
4 weeks after. Yeah.
But you're a very, very internationally known, respectable historian, a scholar in Holocaust, in genocide studies. And you wrote this piece a month after the Hamas attack in order to prevent genocide from happening. But people didn't listen.
Correct. So I actually wrote that it's better to warn about genocide before it happens rather than to lament it after it occurred. And the Genocide Convention is called the Convention of the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. That is, signatory states of the convention have to do what they can to prevent it before it happens. And I was hoping that the Biden administration, this was a Democratic administration, with Blinken, a Secretary of State who was supposed to be a person of more humane inclinations, I would say, that some past Secretary of State would do something.
Yeah.
And they did nothing.
And were you also disappointed apart from the Biden administration back then, in your colleagues?
Yes, so in the same piece, in the latter part of that op-ed, I said that I'm hoping that such institutions that are dedicated to commemorating the memory of the Holocaust, to researching the Holocaust, that have spoken about that as a lesson for all of us to prevent such crimes from ever happening again, will speak out. And I mentioned both Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, which is the state commemorative and research institute for the Holocaust, and the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. These are institutions that have some international standing. Mm-hmm. And I hope that they would say something. They didn't then, and they still have said nothing. The vast majority of the institutions engaged in researching the Holocaust, which have universalized themselves, which have claimed that they should exist, not only because the Jews were murdered in World War II, but because we have to draw lessons from that for the rest of humanity. And we have to make sure that such horrors never happen again. Yeah. They reneged on their commitment. So they did not speak out. And why did they not speak out? That's part of politics. Certainly for these institutions. They were afraid that they would go against the political winds. These institutions that depend on state funds
would be punished in some way.
Yes.
But never again didn't apply for everyone, basically.
No.
In the Netherlands, most politicians are reluctant to use the word genocide, to say it's genocide. And these are a few of the politicians. Let's have a look.
Op het moment dat je het woord genocide gebruikt, heeft dat een extra lading. En dat geldt ook voor het woord genocidaal geweld. Dus wij zeggen als regering altijd, wij gebruiken die term was op het moment dat een rechter dat heeft vastgesteld. Of dat de VN dat heeft vastgesteld. Dus ik gebruik wat dat betreft dat woord niet.
Het Hof spreekt zijn ernstige zorgen uit over de humanitaire crisis in Gaza en roept op tot vrijlating van de gijzelen. Juist deze hele rechtszaak en het vervolg daarvan moeten ervoor zorgen dat er wel een uitspraak of niet komt of er sprake is van genocide. Maar dat doet deze tussentijdse uitspraak nog niet.
Ik vind dat de minister en Kamerleden formeel moeten spreken over vermeende oorlogsmisdrijven, omdat wij de regel hebben dat iets pas een oorlogsmisdrijf is op het moment dat een rechter daarover geoordeeld heeft.
Er is geen sprake van genocide. Israël verdedigt zichzelf. Iedere dode die onschuldige burgers valt, betreur ik. Betreurt ieder mens die beelden ziet. Maar dat is iets anders dan genocide.
These are a few Dutch politicians. Not all, but the majority here said they don't want to say it's a genocide until there's an official ruling of the International Court of Justice. What do you think of that?
The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, which will adjudicate and eventually decide whether this was genocide or not, could take another year to rule on whether the events of 2023 to 2025 were genocide or not. So if you wait for the ICJ to rule, what you're saying is, I may eventually do something about it long after it's over. That's not the commitment that states made when they became signatories to the Genocide Convention. The Genocide Convention makes it incumbent on signatories to act upon not only a genocide when it happens, but even before it happens, to try to prevent it. And if it happens, to try and do something to stop it. And in fact, what is curious about that convention is, unlike all elements of international law after 1945, it makes it possible for states to interfere in the affairs of sovereign states within their own borders if they are committing genocide. And that would include, potentially, military intervention. If they wait until all of this is over, and then they say, well, now the ICJ ruled, so we should have done something, but of course we couldn't, they are actually reneging on their own commitment to stop genocide.
In your book, you also write about your personal story, basically, and how this affected you and your studies and everything, and your view on what's happening. But you lived in the US for many years, but you were born in Israel. What would you say is your relationship with the country nowadays?
Well, right now, my relationship with the country is somewhat fraught, I would say. But, you know, I lived in Israel for the first half of my life. I was born there, I was raised there. I served in the army for 4 years. I shed blood for the country. I was severely wounded. I taught at the University of Tel Aviv. I have many friends and colleagues and family there. And even after I left, I remained in very strong touch with the country, visited it very often. And so I've never severed my relationship with that country. But over time, I became increasingly critical of its policies. And since October 7th, because I've become particularly vocal about that, I think that has created a bit of gap between me and the people that I know best in Israel, who are people who are left of center, to put it mildly.
Yeah, because your book is not even being translated to Hebrew. It's not being published in Israel, also not in Germany. But also the attack of Hamas on the October 7th also has a personal tie to your family.
I can explain
what happened
that,
on the 7th of October, right?
Yeah. So my son's partner comes from Kibbutz Be'eri. And Kibbutz Be'eri is very close to the border with Gaza, and over 100 members of the kibbutz were murdered. And several were taken hostage, including very close members of a family, the husband and the wife. And the 3 daughters of this couple that was taken hostage spent a fair amount of time with my son and his partner, because they basically lost their parents. The mother was released after about 50 days, and the father was kept there until February of 2025 and came out severely emaciated. And of course, there was the trauma of the fact that the kibbutz is destroyed. This is not a family that will probably ever be able to come back to that place. So the entire life that they built there is gone.
Yeah, but your son and his wife and your grandchildren still live in Israel, right?
Oh, yes.
So how did the attack affect you personally?
It was extremely traumatic.
Yeah.
Very traumatic. And in part it was traumatic. One has to understand, even if people were not directly affected, Israel is a small country.
So everyone knows someone.
Everyone
right?
knows someone.
Yeah.
But there's another aspect to this, that many of my friends have children who serve in the military because they're of military age. And so for friends of mine, it's not only the trauma of the events of October 7th, it's when I say that the IDF is involved in war crimes, in crimes against humanity, and in genocide, what does that mean to people I know who may be left-wing, some degree of left-wing or other, whose children are serving in Gaza? Can they think of their children as carrying out war crimes? No, they can't.
But still you say it, so you're not making friends.
Yes, I mean, I don't say it necessarily about my friends' children because I don't know what their children are doing specifically. I say that the IDF and its soldiers are engaged in that. And that means that the IDF is engaged in a criminal war, and everyone who is serving in the IDF is complicit. And the thing with genocide is, you can talk about war crimes. There are units that may commit war crimes and others that don't. But when you talk about genocide, everyone becomes complicit. First of all, it's the military, because the military were carrying out these operations. But secondly, it's all the people who don't say anything. So it's also the parents of those soldiers. It's professors at the university. It's physicians. It's lawyers. The entire state. It's journalists. It's the electronic media. So not speaking about it or denying the reality of it or blocking reporting from it is all making society as a whole complicit in a large-scale crime that was happening and in many ways still is happening in Gaza.
And if you look back at your time, because you served in the IDF as well when you were younger, I think it was you served in the West Bank, in Gaza, in the Sinai, and you wrote in your book, for the first time I understood what it meant to occupy another people. What did the young Omer Bartov see back then?
Look, at the time, I was, of course, very young. I was 18, 19, 20. I served in the West Bank, and I was an occupation soldier.
What did that mean?
Well, in the West Bank, I was mostly either in training or patrolling the border. So I was not engaged directly, personally, in occupation duties, that is, in keeping the population down. But in Gaza, that was a bit different. While I was serving mostly in northern Sinai, my battalion command was in Gaza, so I would go a lot to Gaza. I was then a company commander, and we were sent on patrols in El Arish, in an Egyptian city that was then occupied. And those few instances when I was on patrol in that city, which is now thankfully back in Egypt, left a very uncomfortable sense, uncomfortable sensation on me. I can't say that I could articulate it that clearly at the time.
Yeah.
Why not? Because I was very young.
Yeah.
I was very well socialized into Israel. I wanted to be a soldier. I wanted to be a combat soldier. I wanted to be an officer. I thought I was doing my duty for my country. At the same time, even before I went to the army, I did participate in several small demonstrations that I recall, which were against the occupation.
I want to continue with the parallels you're making and the comparisons you're making with your studies into Nazi Germany and the Holocaust and the genocide that's still happening in Gaza. What are these parallels you draw?
The main parallel is this. Germans in the 1930s and 1940s are told over and over again that Germany had been betrayed in World War I. That Germany lost World War I and much of its territories because he was stabbed in the back in 1918. And he was stabbed in the back by the Jews and the communists.
That was the rhetoric, the narrative.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is called the legend of the stab in the back. Mm-hmm. Of course, they weren't, but that was the legend. And so that they were victims. That they were victims of those internal traitors, Jews and socialists, who turned on the German nation, and because of that, Germany lost the war that it should have won. Mm-hmm. And so when they go to war in World War II, especially against the Soviets, they're going to that war as victims. they're now going to take revenge for the humiliation of losing the First World War, of losing the greatness of the German Empire that was destroyed in World War I. When they encounter the Soviets and they start committing mass crimes there, there's another dynamic that kicks in. If you think that the enemy you're fighting is demonic, is destructive, you're not only thinking about what they had done to you in the past, because you associate them with all those crimes in the past, you're also thinking, what will they do to me if after I've done all these crimes to them, they win? Mm-hmm. They will take revenge on me. They will do to me the same horrible things that I'm doing to them.
Is this also what's happening in the IDF?
Absolutely. Germans associated what the crimes that they saw, they didn't say they were guilty of them. They said it's the Bolsheviks, it's the Jews, even though they knew that they were doing them. So if you talk with Israeli soldiers, as I did, and you say, but you've destroyed schools, you've destroyed hospitals, you've killed thousands of children, they say, well, we didn't have a choice. It's not us, it's Hamas. Mm-hmm. They are guilty, and Hamas are the devil. Hamas are Nazis. That is the rhetoric that began right after October 7th, where on the media everywhere, people were speaking about the attack by Hamas as being a potential Holocaust and Hamas as being Nazis. And if you're fighting Nazis,
as a Jew,
then what are you expected to do? You have to eradicate them. That's the lesson that we learned from the Holocaust.
And the wrong lesson, right?
Of course it's the wrong lesson.
But you drawing these parallels and making these comparisons between the Nazi Germany, the Wehrmacht, and also the IDF, the Israeli army. Jewish people are offended by you saying these things. Do you understand that?
Yes, but what they should be offended is not by what I say, but what the IDF is doing. It's not, what I'm saying is not that Israel is a Nazi state and not that what Israel is doing in Gaza is like the Holocaust. What I'm saying is that Israel, because it sees itself as the eternal victim, it provides itself with license to commit crimes without admitting them and at the same time justifying them. It's both denying that it's doing something and says that it has no choice but to do that. And that mentality, that you give yourself license because you say those people are subhuman, which is created both by Israel's growing obsession with the Holocaust since the 1980s.
Yeah. Is that weaponization of the Holocaust you also write about? This mechanism?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and this is a mechanism that really kicks in the 1980s. Menachem Begin is the first person to start speaking in those terms in 1982 when the IDF is besieging Beirut and the PLO is headed by Yasser Arafat. He says Yasser Arafat in Beirut is like Hitler in his bunker.
So that's when this weaponization of the Holocaust starts. But if you look at the current situation, at the current Israeli government, and what the Israeli army, the IDF, is doing, is that also still connected to the weaponization of the Holocaust?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Yes.
In what way?
First of all, it doesn't start in 82. It starts before, but 82
Obviously,
is a very good example.
But by comparing Arafat to the Nazis, to Hitler, that's even worse. I have a background in anthropology, and one of the things we learn if when genocides are happening, there's also this mechanism of dehumanization, dehumanizing the other, and in this case, of course, it's the Palestinians who are being dehumanized. Can you explain how this dehumanization works?
So look, certainly since 1967, when Israel occupied the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and took over many of the Palestinians that had been expelled from Israel in Operation of Ethnic Cleansing in 1948, takes them back, but does not give them any rights, and treats them as an occupied population. Over time, that occupation creates a process of dehumanization. Why do you feel, as a young man or woman who is enforcing an occupation, that you have a right to do that? How do you enforce that occupation? So you build walls, you build fences, you build checkpoints, you break into people's homes in the middle of the night, you intimidate them, you show them that you're the boss and they're not. And in that process, you give yourself the right to act that way because you think that they don't have the same rights that you have, that they're not as human as you are. that process not only dehumanizes them, it dehumanizes you, because you behave in ways that you would not expect yourself or your children or your parents to behave against anyone else, only against those people. So that creates a process of ongoing dehumanization. Obviously, one of the best examples of that right now is the thousands of Palestinians in Israeli jails who are being treated in absolutely abysmal manner. Some commentators in Israel itself have talked about these camps being like concentration camps.
Yeah, B'Tselem, for example,
yes.
Israeli human rights organization, say that they're concentration camps.
Yeah, people are being starved, people are being tortured, people are being raped.
On a systematic level.
Yes.
So this is for you an example of this
absolute dehumanization.
What should accountability look like? Because people talk about war crimes, war tribunals, for example. What should it look like in according to you?
So I would say that there are two kinds of accountability. Mm-hmm. One is specifically about what happened in Gaza. Now, there are arrest warrants by the ICC for Yoav Gallant, the former Minister of Defense, and for Benjamin Netanyahu, and there may be others. Yeah. Likely there are others against Smotrich and other ministers. So that kind of accountability has to be shown to work. Whether it will, that's a very difficult process. I think there is a possibility that it will happen in the future. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but I think a future Israeli government, after Israel becomes a pariah state, which it's well in the process to becoming, that wants to reintegrate Israel into the international community, will look for a scapegoat. And by then Netanyahu would be handed over to The Hague when he's old and retired.
But is that enough to change what's happening?
No. So this is one thing, but it's crucial. Yeah. It's very important. The second thing is a much bigger issue, and that bigger issue is that if Israel is to go through a process, which I hope at some point it will, with the Palestinians, of redefining the state of Israel, going back to 1948. And redefining what the relation between Jews and Palestinians is and how they can share that space equally and justly, it has to start with the recognition of wrongs by the State of Israel. There has to be a process of truth and reconciliation. And Israel is the one that is the hegemon, and it's the country that has to launch that process. If it doesn't do it, and that's what was not done in Oslo, if it does not go back to 48, not to reverse it, because you cannot reverse history, but to recognize the wrongs and to create a mechanism of some kind of repatriation, some kind of restitution, then no ingenious political solution will work.
So that's very important. You gave a lecture at the NIOD in the Netherlands, and you mentioned that Israel's actions are the main cause for the rise of anti-Semitism. So anyone wishing to combat anti-Semitism needs to address it. Why did you say that?
Well, because it's true. I mean, that's, as I said at the lecture too, anti-Semitism is alive and well. It existed long before Israel was created. It was actually one of the motivations for Zionism. And if the state ever ceases to exist, which I hope it doesn't, anti-Semitism will stay around. But right now, Israeli actions and Israeli violence and the claim of the State of Israel that it is a representative of all the Jews in the world is now threatening Jewish communities around the world, because people hear that and they assume that Jews around the world support Israeli crimes. Now, I suspect that most Jews around the world do not. Yeah. Most of the Jews that I know around the world do not support that, or don't want to know about it, or would rather just that this was over. Yeah.
But what is your message then to them?
My message to Jewish communities is that for their own sake, they should put pressure on their own governments and on their own communities to appeal to the authorities, to their governments, to their representatives, to act, to change Israeli policy, to force Israel into a political paradigm. I say that not only to Jewish citizens, of course. I think all citizens in democratic states who claim to care about humanism, about human rights, about the rule of international law should do that. But Jews are under particular threat. And the threat is not only what Israel is doing right now, which is, of course, a major threat in terms of safety of Jews around the world. It's also that Israel, as I said before, has created a brand of Judaism that is not sustainable for any Jews around the world but those who are lording it over in Israel itself. Israel has created what can only be described as Jewish supremacy. And Jewish supremacy may work in Israel, although it's working in a way that is causing a huge amount of harm to Palestinians. But you can't be a Jewish supremacist in the diaspora.
You also talk about Zionism in your book. Would you call yourself a Zionist?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm obviously not a Zionist now because I think that Zionism has to be discarded. I think that Zionism is a state ideology, having justified what happened in Gaza, having justified genocide, can no longer remain. It's an ideology that has to be discarded, has to be assigned to the garbage heap of history.
So there should be no Zionism anymore?
No. If the State of Israel wants to become, and the State of Israel is there, the State of Israel will not disappear. I would not support that it would disappear. It's an internationally recognized state. There are millions of Jews living there, and they have a right to live there. What they don't have a right to do is to use a state ideology that dehumanizes, brutalizes, and murders other people under their rule. That they don't have a right to do, and Zionism allows that, in fact, calls for that. This kind of Zionism that was created now.
But if you look at the future now, should Israel be a Jewish state?
Well, Israel can only be a Jewish state, which I'm not sure it can, but it can only be a Jewish state if it creates a system between the river and the sea, which is the entire area now is controlled by Israel, where there is a Palestinian state that has equal rights. That is a right of self-determination and a right of return.
For the Palestinians?
For Palestinians.
But this is not what it is, to be clear, but this is what you think it should be, right?
Yes.
Yeah, just to
yes. No.
So what should the future of a peaceful and a safe Israel and Palestine look like?
Well, look, I mean, I support a particular program. It is not a program that will happen tomorrow, but it is the idea of a confederation where there would be two states side by side, more or less along the 1967 borders, one Palestine, one Israel. Both would have a right of self-determination and a right of return, but they would have a different relationship between themselves from that was envisioned in the two-state solution. That is, there won't be a hard border between them, and there will be a distinction between citizenship and residence, so that you could be a citizen of one state but reside in another. And that would recognize certain things. First of all, that both Jews and Palestinians have an emotional, religious, traditional connection to the whole land. They truly do. Secondly, that there are many Palestinians who live in the state of Israel, and there are many Jews who live in what would become the state of Palestine. If you want to prevent population exchange, transfer, ethnic cleansing, you have to create a mechanism that would make it possible for people to live in the other state as residents but not as citizens. And if they misbehave as residents, they could be deported to their own state of citizenship.
But doesn't that still entail a certain racism or
No.
first and second class citizenship if there's a Jewish federation and a Palestinian federation?
No, it would be a Jewish-Palestinian confederation. There would be no distinction between the rights of one state and another.
And when you say the right of return, you talk about the Palestinians who had to flee in 48, right?
All Palestinians.
All Palestinians.
No,
So
it might be Palestinians who live in Rio de Janeiro or live in
Kuwait
Houston.
or in Jordan, anyway.
This would not be the business of the State of Israel.
And if we look at the current situation, there's a lot of violence. There's still
Correct.
people dying every day.
Yes.
There's attacks still in Gaza, the West Bank, also on Lebanon now. What do you think should happen to stop this? What should happen?
International sanctions.
International sanctions.
Yeah.
By whom?
By the United States, and then followed by its timid European allies.
International sanctions.
International sanctions.
And what kind of sanctions?
Political, economic, and military.
All of them?
All of them.
Academic, cultural?
Yeah, before October 7th, I opposed BDS for one reason. Because I said that Israeli universities are the only place where you can still find some elements of opposition, alternative thinking to the growing racism and violence in Israeli politics. After October 7th, Israeli universities went through a process of what the Germans called Gleichschaltung. They coordinated themselves with the regime. They have never spoken out. Individuals have, and I admire them for it. But universities have treated their own Palestinian students and faculty abysmally. And they don't have much, they have many Palestinian students, but very few Palestinian faculty or people in administrative positions. And they were treated abysmally, and they're intimidated. And so I personally, for one thing, do not want to be associated anymore with Israeli universities. I invite colleagues, I certainly admire some people there, but I have no intention of working with Israeli universities, and I think they should be boycotted.
Boycotted.
Absolutely.
So you're now pro BDS. You're pro.
Yeah, whatever it is, we can call it BDS.
Dutch universities should boycott.
Absolutely.
Israeli universities,
Yes.
but also economic boycotts, military boycotts.
Yes.
But that would mean that there's no Iron Dome.
Yes.
Right?
Well, it would mean, most importantly, that Israel would not have a diplomatic Iron Dome, which is its main protection. That's the U.S. veto power in the Security Council. I don't think that Israel has the internal dynamic to change the political paradigm. As you were saying, people are living there now in a sort of bloody-minded state of mind.
Yeah.
They truly believe that the only thing they must use, even though it's painful, is more and more force. And if it's not enough, they should use more and more of it. And they're not only destroying a lot of people, they've displaced now 1 million people in southern Lebanon as well. They're also destroying their own society. They're destroying the rule of law in Israel. It is becoming an authoritarian country. This is the goal of Netanyahu. Now, if you want to save Israel from itself, if you actually care about Israel, and I'm not talking about vengeance here, as a European politician, if you actually care, if you don't care about your military contracts with the Israeli firm because you think it's a good deal because you want to prepare for Russia or you want to make some money on the side, but if you truly care about the Jewish state and you feel some responsibility for it, which I think the Europeans should feel,
because of the Second World War, you mean?
Yes, yeah. Absolutely, and the Netherlands has its own, story, which is not a particularly nice one. If you care, then you want to save that country from becoming an authoritarian, violent, genocidal country, which it is now becoming. And the way to do it is to force it to face reality. That is to bring back the center of power of Israel to Jerusalem itself and to tell it you have to find a political solution. You cannot keep using bombs, killing other people and destroying your own system in the name of a kind of messianic ideology that is also, among other things, distorted Judaism into a religion of a completely different nature that is more akin to that of the Zealots during the rebellion against the Romans, the Roman Empire, than to anything that Jews would recognize today. Certainly my grandparents would never have recognized that kind of Judaism.
If I follow your argument that this is what Europe should do, also because we have an extra responsibility because what we did in the Second World War, could you then also say that Europe is complicit in what's happening at this moment?
Of course it is. Of course it is. I mean,
so Europe, even the Netherlands, is complicit in the genocide that's happening, still happening in Gaza.
Yes. I mean, to my knowledge, the Netherlands has provided Israel with military technology and parts for aircraft and other things. Yeah. And the Netherlands also has pretty good contracts with Israel for Israeli military technology. Yeah. And that is across the board. This is a project that has been going on now for decades, that has evolved over time. Germany signed a vast contract with Israel for Israeli technology, and the Israeli Navy is built by the Germans. Israeli tank engines are patented in Germany. Germany provides up to 30% of Israeli armaments, and the EU is Israel's largest trading partner. Israeli universities, Israeli research, Israeli science is receiving vast amounts of money from the EU. So there is leverage, but that leverage has to be used, not to destroy the Jewish state, but to protect it.
Yeah.
When Germany says, when Chancellor Angela Merkel said, Germany's Staatsräson is to protect Israel, Germany's Staatsräson is to make sure that the commitments made after World War II to create an international system of human rights, to create international courts, to make sure that such crimes as the Nazis had committed in World War II would not be repeated, that is Germany's Staatsräson. And it does have a responsibility for Israel. Absolutely it does. But the responsibility is to tell that country, you are on the wrong path, and if you don't listen to us, we are not going to help you.
Yeah. So there's not only responsibility, obviously, towards the Jewish people, towards Israel, but also towards other people, in this case, that's the Palestinians. To me, that's the frustrating thing. I think we all studied history. We all know what happened. There's certain universal patterns, right? And every time it's like we don't really seem to learn the lessons of history, the lessons of the World War II, the lessons of how genocides are being committed, how this hatred, how it works. Yeah. This, for me, as a European citizen, and as a journalist, is insanely frustrating. But I can assume this is also the case for you as a historian. You know, this is your field.
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating on a number of levels. First of all, it's frustrating because European politicians, also quite a few intellectuals, you hear that on a lot of mainstream media, people giving license to inhumane acts, to crimes in the name of human rights, and feeling themselves to be acting morally while they know that they're actually allowing violence that they could stop.
Yeah.
And often this happens partly because of a misreading of reality, because often I kept thinking, why did President Biden behave the way he did? I think they had really bad advisors and they're ignorant about the situation. That's
the lobby also?
And APAC? Partly it has to do with money, with interest, with domestic. So in the name of morality, they're actually doing something else. They are lining their own pockets, or they are making sure that they stay with political power. But there's another frustration, of course, and that frustration is for someone like me who began his career working on what? On the rise of fascism or Nazism. How do societies evolve the way they do? Thinking that this is history. This is something that happened in the past. We have to understand why it happened. That's why I studied the German army, to understand the mentality even of the little people who were doing that thing. It wasn't only leaders. There were individuals who were involved in crimes. And to make sure that we learn those lessons. But I thought that was behind us. And 80 years later, you see that returning. It's returning in all kinds of ways, also with the rise of the extreme right, with the rise of racism.
But then, was it then emotional for you to write this book about Israel, what went wrong?
Look, it was emotional, obviously, because I'm talking about my own country, I'm talking about people I know, I'm talking about a shattered dream. I dedicated the book to my father, who believed in a very different kind of Zionism. And in many ways, I'm glad that he passed away 10 years ago, because he already then, at the time before he passed away, he spoke about Netanyahu as the wrecker of Zionism. That's how he described him. But I tried at the same time to write this book in as dispassionate a manner, as analytical manner as I could, because my goal was to try to explain to myself, first of all, and to other readers, how I see this transformation. And I have to say that those who say these days, well, there's nothing to explain, it was always bad from the beginning, giving themselves the easy way out. Nothing is predetermined in history. We need to understand how things evolved.
Mm-hmm. Omer Bartov, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time and for this interview.
Thank you.
Thank you.